Hi, Anthony and Bob Barker here, and today we're going to be making this router table. Let's get to it. So my original plan was to actually put a router plate in the far end of my workbench. And that was my plan ever since I built the workbench. And when it came time to get ready to actually do it, I don't know, I just kind of ended up wanting to make a standalone router table. There's multiple reasons behind that, and like one, I just kind of needed more storage, and also I kind of like the workbench the way it is. I use that big surface often. I just kind of didn't want to really interrupt it much. So to start this off, I'm getting all my pieces ready. I'm planning on putting a divide in there, so that's why I did that upper dado, and then I'm putting rabbets on the bottom like I like to do when I make these base cabinets. It just kind of helps support it and lock it into place a little easier for me. And the beginning of this build is actually very similar to some of the cabinets in my miter station build, so I'll put a link above if you want even more details on that build process. Again, I'm using these 90-degree positioning squares, and they have helped me so much on all the cabinets that I've made recently. They make it a really nicer process to do. I still do add those side clamps for extra pressure while the glue is drying up. And for this one, it's going to be moving a lot, so I just added some screws from underneath just for some extra support and sturdiness there. So here I'm breaking down that kind of shelf divider that's going to go into those dado grooves right there. And I originally wanted to make this out of Baltic birch, but the lumberyard I'd typically go to was completely out, so I ended up just getting this pre-finished regular birch plywood, but that also means for the glue up surfaces I had to kind of sand some of it down so the glue would adhere a little bit better. And here I'm adding a couple pocket holes just to help attach the top surface later on in the build. So for my overall plan is I definitely wanted to get more storage out of this. So I'm going to be making two really big drawers on the bottom. And then the top middle surface is just going to be the compartment for the router itself. And then we'll be making some different drawers on the sides of it as well. And with the basic box already together, we're going to start chopping down some of the support pieces using the miter station here. Then after that, it's back to work on the workbench, and Bob Barker is checking everything out and making sure that I'm not slacking. So then I got the pocket holes drilled out so we can get those supports in place. And like usual, I always put on some clamps when I'm doing pocket holes so it doesn't move on you. And then after that, I want to put these dividers in the top compartments. And to make room for those supports, I'm just using the jigsaw just to cut out space for them. And then on the back part, I'm going to have the top and the upper back support that are kind of butted on each other. So that's why I'm cutting out a little bit of a different shape on this part of the divider. And man, at some point, I really just need to go get a new jigsaw. This thing is super old and beat up, and it just is so hard to keep straight and to get it to work right. I mean, it still works, but it sure does like fighting me as it does. So here, I also sanded down where I'm going to be gluing these dividers into the surface, and I initially started planning on attaching these pocket holes, and then after I was doing that I realized, oh, you'll never see the bottom surface. I could just screw it from the top and the bottom. So that's what I ended up doing after I started off with some pocket screws, which you can see here. In the end, it really doesn't matter what method you do, they both will work, but without the pocket holes it's actually a little nicer when you do look inside that compartment. And with the really sturdy top I'm going to be putting on this, you can probably get away without doing all these supports. But like I said, this thing's going to be moved around and kind of abused a lot, so I wanted to make sure I kept it as sturdy as possible. So I got that back top support on, and then the one back here as well. And then I'll just screw those to the side, and then I like to screw them into each other. And then, of course, I'll be screwing them down into those dividers as well. So everything is nice and secure. And then for here, we're just attaching that, and I'm rechecking just to making sure that everything is nice and straight and level for my top surface for later. And since this is definitely going to need to be a mobile one, here we're going to go ahead and just put on the casters now. Going to help me move it around as I continue to make this. And next up is back to the table saw so we can cut down the pieces to make all of our drawers. And then we go ahead and switch over to the dado stack so we can put in the dado groove here that's going to accept the bottom of our drawers. And while we're going back over to the trusty Craig jig here to put in some pocket holes. And then after that, then we can get to assembling the drawers. For this one, I just started off with a dry fit just to make sure everything was good and tight, and then after that we just kind of use some clamps to get it all nice and glued up, and then use the pocket holes to keep it nice and secure. And as you can see, these are pretty big drawers, and that's why I went with a little bit of a thicker bottom. And after we make it, do want to make sure that everything is nice and square and I don't have to adjust it before the glue dries. So now we're ready to get these drawers installed. So I just like to make a center line on the side of my drawer, and then I can put the slide piece into place. And then for this one, I'm not using the Craig jigs because with the pre-finished surface, I tried to put it up there and just kept on slipping and slipping and just wasn't going to give me a straight alignment. So I just flipped the cabinet on the side, drew a line where I wanted it to be, and then just screwed it into place. And that worked out perfectly. So next up, we're going to do the top drawers. Now for this one, I changed my design kind of mid-build here. I originally was going to put the slides on the side of the cabinet box, but then I decided I wanted to be able to access those drawers from each side, so I decided to put one on top and bottom. To be honest, I don't really know if you're supposed to do that, but I've been using it and it seems to do just fine, so I'm going to go with it. And since my miter saw wasn't big enough to make these cuts, I just pulled out my crosscut sled just to cut down the pieces for these drawer boxes. And for this one, I'm just making the basic box, and I'm doing two of them at the same time. So the same process as before, but now I'm going to put a center divider right in the middle of it. And that I just use pocket holes from the bottom to secure that in place, and I kind of fidgeted around to figure out what was the best way for me to do that. So then after I got it in place, the one on one side is basically just going to be trays. So I just cut down these little extra strips. That way nothing's going to roll out when I open these, and then I glued them and brad nailed them in place. The top one, I couldn't quite get my gun in there, so I just put brad nails on the side and then lots of glue in the middle, then clamped the heck out of it, and that keeps it nice in place. And plus it's a pretty snug fit, so it's never really going to move anyways. And right about then I realized in my design I forgot to make space for the drawer slides. So I had to break the box before the glue dried, and then I just used my stop block there just to cut off an extra inch for the drawer slides off the top and bottom of this. Then I put in some new pocket holes and then reattached the top surface. So it's not quite as even on those two surfaces there for the trays as I wanted, but it's still going to work out fine. So for here, we're going to install these drawer sides just like before. Just mark a center line and drill it into place. And then I made these little extra supports there just the same size as the slides, so that way it was easy just to kind of line it up, clamp it, and install it right there. And the first time I was installing this, I was a little nervous about how it was worked, but it actually slid in pretty nicely. And next up, we're cutting down some extra pieces for the other side, and I'm just using that shop cart I just made as an extra piece just to kind of hold it, and Bob Barker wanted to come check everything out, so can never refuse him. So for the right drawer, I'm going to be using for general storage for all the different accessories I need for the router. But for on the left side, I'm going to be having the storage for my router bits. My collection actually is not very big at the moment, but I do plan to add a lot more as I go. So I'm going to use the top section for the 1/4 inch bits, and then the bottom section for 1/2 inch bits. So I just made a grid there and just drilled out all the holes for them. That way we can just kind of get them all nice and stored on that. And the basic box was made just the same as the other, including that centerpiece, but then I put those pieces that I drilled just right on top and clamp them into place, and then just screwed them in from below. That way they'll never move unless I want them to, and if I do need to change my storage options around, I can just remove those screws and take off those pieces and add in some different ones if I want to later. I also like to just kind of go in and out there when I drill into from one piece to the other. It seems to just kind of sit a little bit nicer and stay flush better. So we go ahead and install this drawer, and then we got all the basic drawers in place. So next is the back piece. And I needed to cut out the hole for the dust collection, so I just set it in place and marked a line where the bottom of that compartment is, and then I'm just drilling a hole straight through, and then this one is going to be for the cord to come out. So then we glue it up, and then we just go ahead and set it in place, and then we're going to use some brad nails to secure it. And then I like to intentionally make this just a little bit bigger than it needs to be. That way, once I'm done getting it secure in place, I can just come through with a flush trim bit and get it perfect. And I ended up making this back out of 1/2 inch plywood because I knew I was going to be attaching the dust collection to it, and as well as I may hang some other things off of that or the other sides at some point, so I want to make sure it's nice and sturdy. So next up, we're going to be making the drawer faces. So I like to make these out of a single continuous piece of plywood, so it has kind of a continuous grain. It just looks a little bit nicer. And usually I just kind of cut that out to the size of the cabinet, and then the curve of the saw blade kind of gives me the gap that I'm looking for in between all of the drawer faces. And with all those cut out, it's time just to kind of get the holes ready for the drawer pulls, and this is also going to help us install them. My preferred method is just to put the cabinet on the back, and then I get the gaps that I want, and then just use some pocket hole screws, just kind of screw them into the cabinet, and then that'll kind of secure them in place. And for here, the edges weren't perfect, so I put some tape and some spacers in between those drawers and got a flush trim bit to get them all nice and straight. So then we kind of open the drawers, and then we can fully secure them with some screws from the back. And then after we get all those screws in place, then we can take out those outer screws and then drill straight through, and that'll give us room for the bolts for the drawer pulls. Then next up on the list is making the drawer face for that middle compartment. Now, to be honest, I could have just got some cabinet hinges, but I was feeling kind of lazy and I didn't want to, and honestly, I just kind of wanted to try something different. So I figured, let's just go for magnets, because I'm not going to be opening that very often anyways. So I cut down some squares, marked the center of each one, and then I just use a Forstner bit just to kind of drill down, and I can put a magnet right there in the middle, and then once I attach that to the cabinet and the drawer, then they should hold in place. So I mixed up some epoxy just to kind of make sure that those magnets aren't going to move, and of course checking the polarity to make sure they attract and not repel each other. Next, we put some CA glue there, and I used one spare piece as a spacer that's going to be on the back of the cabinet, and to make sure that's exactly where I want it to be. And the reason why I'm setting it back like this is because I want the cabinet to be able to sit down into it. I don't want them to be flush completely with the front. That way it doesn't kind of move a little up and down. It keeps it exactly where I want it and keeps all the gaps and everything looking nice. So we're making some extra ones here, and I'm going to drill straight through it. That way I can put a screw into there. As you can see, the hole there. And so I put little screws through there, and I set it into place where it needs to be. And then I'm going to set the drawer on top and get all of my gaps exactly perfect how I want them. And then I'm just going to kind of mash down on that drawer and put a little indent on the back side of that face. That way it shows me exactly where I want those to be. So I just kind of screw those down a little bit just to get a little bit bigger hole, but they kind of wiggle around too much. So then I use some CA glue to secure them into place to make sure they're going to stay exactly how I want it. And then after those both set and dry, then we'll put the screws all the way through it to make sure it never moves. And we did countersink those screws. That way, once we get them in place, there's still plenty of room beyond that for the magnets, which we're putting in right there. And after we get those in place, we go ahead and just put on the drawer pull, and then we go check it out. And then as I did, you can see it tilted forward a little bit, so definitely need to put some on top. So I made some more, the same thing with the screw sticking out, and I'm just pushing them against the back end and making those little indents right exactly where I want those to be as well. So that way those will line up perfectly. So just as the other ones, we're just going to use the Forstner bit here just to make the room for those magnets. Then we'll go ahead and epoxy those in place, and then we'll be attaching the other ones to the cabinet box itself. And for both the top and the bottom ones, I glued those in place, but I also pre-drilled and then sunk screws all the way through them just to make sure that they never move anywhere on me. So then we can get this drawer face right in place, and it sits nicely. And I also wanted to mention, if you do like our builds here and everything that we're putting out, it'd be great help if you liked, subscribed, or just leave some comments telling us what you think about these builds down below. All right, and that's it for today. We got this base cabinet built. Next time, we're going to be doing the fence, the dust collection, the on-off switch, and tidying everything up. And we already do have detailed plans on how to make this if you're interested in it, so check the links below, as well as any other tools or supplies that we use if you're interested in checking those out. Otherwise, we'll see you guys in the next one.